Welcome to the Tenant Screening Podcast, a training course for landlords to understand how to effectively find great renters. Sponsored by VeteranLandlord.com. And now your host, Edward O'Daniel.
Hello, landlords, and welcome to the Tenant Screening Podcast. I'm your host, Edward O'Daniel, and I'm totally excited to be on this episode because this episode has a lot of meat in it, a ton of meat. This right here is probably going to be the most important episode of this series of tenant screening podcasts. This is going to be dealing with, and for those that are coming to me through video, you're going to see I've got my tenant screening handbook up here. This is a book that you can go and I wrote specifically to give away to people. You can get it for free at VeteranLandlord.com. You can just log in, create your free account, and it's in the document libraries area. But here we're going to be covering all the different issues regarding qualifications. Now, if you've been a landlord and you've published or you have marketed your property out there, most likely you have gotten phone calls from people or emails replying back to you with, what are your qualifications? I can't tell you how much that drove me nuts, drove me crazy. And until I actually published, came up with a list of all of my qualifications and physically publish them on my website to give to people, I would always have to go through this every single time. Man, I can tell you, please do this. Take the time to go through this tenant screening handbook, download it, go through it, come up with all your qualifications and make sure you post them. Okay, even if you post them in your marketing description, that would be perfectly fine. But posting them there is going to save you a ton of time. Because right now, when I took phone calls when I was in early on, people would call me, what are your qualifications? We'll get into that, but it's like I was on the phone with them literally 10 to 20 minutes per person, and it was driving me nuts. I got to the point where I hated answering the phone because every time I did it, I know the first thing they're going to ask me is, what are their qualifications? They're going to ask me, would this be okay? Well, what about this? Well, if I have this on my record, is that going to be okay? And all of that just leads to, they're sort of like tire kickers. You don't even know if they're going to be good qualified people that are going to want to move into your property or fill out an application. They're just taking up a bunch of your time trying to figure out what your qualifications are. So without further ado here, let's hop into qualifications and sort of what this means. Now, qualifications means a list of all of your requirements that you have. And if you take a look here, here's a few of them that I have listed. One of them is going to be income. That's going to be a big one. Credit and credit history. Do you require certain credit scores? If so, what are you allowed and what are you not allowed, kind of a thing. Criminal history, rental history. What are some of your automatic denials? We'll kind of get into these. Employment. What do you require for employment? Is there a certain length of time that they have to be employed? Things like that. What are your feelings on roommates? We'll kind of get into that. Pros and cons, pets, cancellations, renter's insurance, security deposit, applicants, occupancy, smoking. These are all big high-level things, and you just need to make sure that you have your procedure for all of these. And these are not all-encompassing. These are just a portion of the ones that you have available. So let's kind of hop in here. Let's kind of talk about income. So with income, most of the standard now are going to be somewhere between 3 to 4 times the monthly rent. Now, do you have other qualifications? Could you make it whatever you want? Of course. But just take a look at it. If you go out and take a look at just some of the standard sheets that I have, there are some other rental qualifications of some examples on the Veteran Landlord site that you can download and kind of see what other people are doing. Or you can even just Google rental qualifications sheets, and you'll see a bunch of other property management companies. You will see a bunch of other landlords that have published their qualifications online. This could be a really good start to being able to utilize their framework to go in and say, this looks good. Let me change a few of these things. This is a little bit too stringent, or let me make this more, make this less. But you can at least use it as a framework to kind of get started. Okay, but I want to talk through all of these because each one of these has different topics and different pros and cons of each one of the qualifications. So with income, you typically need to make sure that people can afford living there. They can afford to pay the rent. They can afford to pay utilities. They can afford to live, buy their food, pay for, just to live. So typically somewhere between 3 to 4 times a monthly rent works for that. Could you ask for 6 times a monthly rent? Of course you can. Now, the pro of that obviously is the people are going to have a lot of money. But the con of that is your house is probably going to be vacant, house or apartment, probably going to be vacant for a while, looking for somebody that makes that much money, willing to move into your particular apartment. So you kind of have to balance that. That's kind of where this balancing act comes into, and you might have to adjust. Once you have your qualifications and you start seeing in your area, you then might have to adjust again your qualifications to make sure that you fit the right people. So income is important, credit and credit history. Another good important one here. So I know there are some people out there that it's like, you need to have this type of credit score or higher, because anything less than this and it falls underneath the automatic denials. That was one of the other ones that we talked about. So you need to make sure that we haven't gotten there yet, but you need to make sure that everything is listed, and even put the denials probably higher on your list. That way people know they can look at the denials first. So well, some of the other things that would fall underneath automatic denials, we'll get to that here in just a little bit. I know I'm hopping around here, but let's get back to credit history. So credit history, do they have to have a certain credit score? Do they have to, what happens if they owe money on other bills? What if they owe money on utilities, owe money on cell phone bills? What if they've had a car repossessed? What are your standards for that? So those are all things that you're going to have to build and make sure you include, so that if they meet these parameters, if you get the report and it says, well, we've had a car repoed last year, we've had this, then excuse me, know that that's not going to qualify for what I need. So that's another one that you're going to have to work on. And that's where the examples on the veteranlandlord.com website can help you out. Another one is criminal history. So do you accept any criminal history? Like, what if somebody had a misdemeanor when they were younger? Speeding, moving violations, or what are those here? So do you accept misdemeanors? If so, what level of misdemeanor? Do you accept felonies? That's also a possibility. What if it's a felony, and is there certain rules regarding that? Meaning, what types of felonies? I know myself personally, I do not like drug and violent related felonies. Those are just people that I don't really care to have in our units, because they've just shown a history of violence, aggression, drugs, or stuff like that, which I don't want in our units or buildings. You may be different. So criminal history. Are all felons bad? I mean, what if somebody, went up for a white collar crime? Is that still going to be something that you, if it pops up on there for embezzling or something like that, is that something that is going to prevent you from renting from them? So you just need to have that. The one thing you don't want to do is run across a situation that your qualifications do not prepare you for. So eventually it will happen. There will be that one case that comes up that's like, I don't really have any qualifications for this. Well, you might then need to expand your qualifications to change it to include this, either whichever way you want to go, whether you accept it or whether you deny it. So criminal history is something that you're going to have to face. Now, if you're doing this yourself, you need to make sure that you get a screening report that generates criminal history. Okay, that's sort of a given on this. If you're doing this yourself, you're going to need to have credit history, criminal history. The next one's going to be rental history. Rental history is not something that you can get from a third-party provider. You're going to have to do this yourself. So what this means is, on the rental application, when you have your rental application, you could say something like, I need the previous 3 years, 2 years, 5 years worth of rental history from you, because I want to check I want to check previous landlords and your existing landlord to get good recommendations from them that you're a good resident, good tenant. So having that rental history means now you have to call them and you have to get a rental history from them. Now, typically what this entails, some people will give you a verbal. They'll call you over the phone and give you the information. Other people will require that you send them authorization. So at the bottom of your rental application, there should be an area that just says that the applicant is authorizing you to get information from previous landlords. It should have some verbiage, some legal verbiage on there that you can send over to the existing, current, or even past landlords that will give you authorization. For instance, the applicant is giving you authorization to get their information. So you might very well need to send that over along with the rental history verification form. Okay, these forms, again, available on the veteran landlord site, just simply state when did the person move in, how much was their rent, were they late at all? I mean, it has a bunch of series of questions that you want to get from the previous landlord to make sure that they're going to be a good qualified tenant. Now, one of the things that you need to also make sure of here is sometimes applicants lie. Believe it or not, yes, that is true. Some applicants will lie to you and not tell you the truth. And they will not give you the landlord phone number and email address of their actual landlord. It could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be a buddy that is willing to give them a good recommendation because you may not know any different. So, having said this, one of the other resources as a landlord that you need to have is you need to be able to have access to the public records, meaning you need to be able to go to that address that they put on the application and find out who the owner of the property is using the public records. So once you know that, you can match that up against the person who they have listed as their landlord. Now, sometimes the owner of the property is not always the same as the landlord. Some people could have a property management company or another person manage the property, but whoever that person is that they have listed as their landlord, you want to make sure that you know what their relationship is to the owner. As a matter of fact, one of the pre-qualification questions is to simply ask them who the owner of the property is and make sure that they know. So you've looked it up on the public records. You want to make sure that the person you're calling knows, because if they don't even know who the owner of the property is or anything like that, it might be very suspicious. So this is where it does take a little bit of work here to really get a really good rental history. And this is, again, a manual process. You're going to have to do this yourself. But all the information you need is available just in the veteran landlord area. But rental history, make sure that you have good rental history. If you cannot get a rental history, then that's a component that's actually going to count against them. Because if you don't have rental history, then you have no clue, no history whatsoever of people living anywhere else, if they're going to be a good tenant or not. Now, you will run across this whenever you have new, younger people. Okay, this is going to be completely up to you whether or not you accept this or not. But when people move away from home, it could be a college student, it could be a person graduating from college and moving into their very first apartment or home. Now, if they do this, then obviously they don't have rental history. If they've lived in the dorms at college and they've never had to rent a place, they will not have any rental history. So given that situation, you need to make sure that your process can handle that, and they're maybe not penalized because they don't have rental history because of their age. Now, this really doesn't violate the fair housing at all, because you're not determining them based upon age, but because of their age, they don't have any rental history. But you still need to make sure that if you do not get rental history for one person, that you also count that against the younger person without rental history too, because otherwise you're treating them differently. So can you see this? We've already gone over just a few of the qualifications, and you're probably seeing the depth and the breadth of how much you need to sit back and have inside of your qualifications and how you need to build this and develop this. This will take you hours. I'm just letting you know, of just thinking, writing, typing this stuff up. It is well worth your time to spend a couple of hours on a weekend going through this, downloading just even another person's rental qualifications, looking what they have, looking at the tenant screening handbook, and putting together your own sort of piece of your qualifications, and then using this and then rereading that as a framework to say, is this the kind of person I really want living here? Does this meet all the qualifications of the person that I would want to rent to? So moving on, automatic denials. Okay, I brought this up earlier. I always have automatic denials listed at least separately or at the top of the list when it comes to the website and rental qualifications, because I want to make sure that people who apply do not apply if they meet any one of my automatic denials. Now, I will tell you some of mine. This is in no way influencing you, but these are just the ones that make sense to me. So automatic denials are anybody that's currently in eviction. So if you're currently being evicted from your current location, that is an automatic denial for us. So that is one thing that is about it. If you're currently in an active bankruptcy, then that's an automatic denial. Now, bankruptcy is one of those ones where if you don't know about it, if you kind of get stuck in there, you're going to have to go to court you're going to have to go to court, first of all, to be allowed to evict the person if they're in bankruptcy. So that's kind of where it gets kind of messed up. But without having to go into it, you can look it up. We don't really go deep into bankruptcies here, but if they have an active bankruptcy, which should show on their report, that's going to be an automatic denial. It's just not worth getting involved with that while the bankruptcy is currently active. If it's been dismissed, if it's finalized and been done, then you can have a whole different set of policies and procedures regarding that. But if it's active, just be careful, because you can kind of get sucked in as a creditor in there, and then now you're involved in the bankruptcy, and that's not going to be good. So some other automatic denials are things like, what if they don't make enough money? What if you have a unit and it's renting for just say $1,000 a month, and somebody comes up and applies and they just make $1,000 a month? So that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, you look at that saying, well, the rent is $1,000, you only make $1,000, you can't afford this place. So if you don't meet my minimum income requirement of whatever that multiplier is, then my answer is no. It's an automatic denial. You're simply stating on your website of your qualifications, don't apply. Don't apply if you meet any one of these, because I will not accept you. And one of the other things that I would also do that's not a part of qualifications, it just popped into my head, is make sure that when people apply, that you put in there that application fees are non-refundable. So that way you don't have to worry about, well, you denied me here, you didn't even run my report or anything. That's right. If they can't even read your qualifications, go through that, and without applying first, then application fees are non-refundable. They don't make enough money, or if they hit any one of your automatic denials, then just rubber stamp it denied. You might very well need to send them a letter back stating why they've been a letter back that says why they've been rejected or denied. That is something that as a landlord, you need to be able to do, because people can ask you for that and you have to be able to provide it. So that's another one of those things that if you do your own screening and you deny people, you will need to tell them why and provide them a letter for that. So those are just some of the automatic denials that you should have right up on front, for whatever it is. If it's a criminal history or anything like that, then you need to put it up there. Do not, these will be rejected. Automatic denial for violent felons, or if your felony is within even a certain time frame. Maybe if it was a certain time, like if the crime was committed 20 years ago, is that the same as if it was committed 2 years ago? Now, granted, they might still be incarcerated if it was 2 years ago, but you get my point. So the time frame comes into play here. You need to make sure that you build out your qualifications for all the different types of situations you're going to see. Now, next is going to be your employment. So employment is another one. Right now, do you have a certain minimum? Do you care if people just start a job? That's going to be completely up to you. Roommates are something that I don't personally like, and I really don't like to influence people, but roommates can be a pain from a landlord perspective, because when roommates sign up here, and keep in mind, roommates could be 2, roommates could be 3, could be 4. Now, if you look at the roommate mentality, this is kind of what I mean by this. Roommate mentality is, if I'm just going to try to take an example. Let's just say the rent is $1,000 a month and you have 4 people living in a 4-bedroom house. Just throwing out some numbers. Each person then would be responsible for $250 worth of the rent. Now, roommate mentality says my rent is $250. Now, if I pay my rent and roommate number 3 does not pay their rent, that's not my fault, because I paid my portion of the rent. This is the roommate mentality that you're going to face. Now, as far as the landlord goes, that's not your problem. Your problem is all four of these people are on the lease. They all agreed to pay $1,000. I don't care who pays what exactly. That's something for the roommates to work out. But I'm just trying to let you know, roommate mentality is I pay my portion of the rent. I pay my portion of the utilities. I pay my portion. That's kind of how they look at that. And as a landlord, I don't want you to get involved in that. Again, you're looking at it, hey, I'm just supposed to get this rent. I don't care who pays me for what. All of you are at fault if I don't get the rent money. So roommates, again, could be good or bad. I know there's people out there that do like college housing or roommate housing, perfectly fine. You just need to make sure that you understand what you're getting into as far as roommates go. Now, one of the other thing I want to also go back to real quick when it comes to income, kind of made me think with roommates is how many incomes will you take for income source? That's something to think about as well. Think about it here. Will you take 2 income sources, 3 income sources, 4? What if the roommates, you have 4 roommates and it was $1,000? Will you combine all 4 of their jobs and their incomes together to help qualify them? Or what is the minimum number here? So that's something to think about here. Ultimately, the one thing I want to make sure that you understand is the more incomes you include, the more exposure you have to failing for this. Because take the 4 roommates. What happens if one of the roommates get ticked off and they get upset and they just said, forget this, I'm moving out. Next thing you know, now that income part is gone out of the whole house. So now the other 3 are going to have to make up the difference. I don't know if their incomes are going to allow that or not. So having fewer incomes ultimately will make you safer. Typically, if you just had one income, like the breadwinner, if it was sort of let's just take the example of, husband and wife stays home with the kids, husband has a good job, makes more than enough money. That right there is probably going to be one of the safest places, because that person makes, all you need is that one person to make the most money, and that person's most likely going to be able to support the family. So that's great. Now, as you add 2, 3, or 4, the more you add, that's going to be a little bit more riskier for you. So just keep in mind for that. So moving on, pets. Pets are always a good one here. So do you allow pets? Do you not allow pets? Now, when I get into pets here, I want to make sure that you understand this is not talking about emotional support animals or service-related animals, okay? This is sort of a special topic that you're going to have to get into. We do have some training videos available for that on the Veteran Landlord site that kind of covers the difference between emotional support animals, service animals, what you could do and not do. I'm not going to be talking about those during the pets qualifications. This is simply, will you accept dogs? Will you accept cats? Will you accept a bird? Will you accept a lizard? These are all different type of pets. Now, what pets are you actually going to charge fees for? That's another thing. So if it has a dog, a cat, typically that has pet fees included, could have pet deposits. Well, you're going to have to come up with those numbers. What does that look like for you? What are you allowed to risk? Now, depending upon your depending upon your type of housing, for instance, what happens if it's a condo? And what happens if inside of the condo, the association says no pets allowed? Well, then you're going to have to need to make sure that for this particular property, you post there are no pets, because you can't have pets at this property. But if you have other properties where pets are allowed, what is your pet policy? Is there a certain number of dogs, certain number of pets, certain types of dogs? Do you kind of see where we're going here? So typically one of the things that I have to tell people about is whenever you get insurance on a property, and especially if it's a non-owner occupied property, it becomes across a non-owner occupied insurance policy. Most of those insurance policies actually have a clause in there, most of them, please check yours, for an aggressive breed dog. So an aggressive breed dog is Doberman Pinschers, Rottweilers, Pit Bulls, German Shepherds, I think it's a Doberman Pinschers, but all these, there's certain type of an aggressive breed dogs that are listed. And if people have those dogs, your insurance policy can be canceled for that. So please keep that in mind, that if you do have restrictions on your insurance, that you need to make sure that whoever is moving in understands that, and that those pets do not violate any of your insurance clause, because they could, if they, I had this happen to me personally here. I didn't really know about it. This was probably 12 years ago or so. I rented to somebody, and lo and behold, they told me they had a dog. Didn't really make any big deal about it. It was a Doberman Pinscher, very well trained and so forth. But my insurance company decided to do a drive-by of the property to take a look at it. And guess what they saw, in the fenced-in backyard? They saw this nice Doberman Pinscher that that was there, and wrote me up. And then the next couple of days, I got a violation notice, and they canceled my insurance. Well, that sucked. I had to take some time to go back and find another insurance carrier to make sure that the dog got taken care of, because otherwise I'm probably going to be in violation again. So those are things that I want to be making you aware of, because knowing those things up front makes it very easy to filter people when they come through. It really does. I know we're talking about a lot of different stuff here for qualifications, but having these down will make it so easy. They almost filter people out, or know those people that you really want to have in there. So pets, there's a lot of stuff to go over with pets for that. So please take a look at that, and just make sure that you have all of your qualifications of what you're going to select on there, and what's allowed, what's not allowed, what are the costs. All of that stuff needs to be involved with that. So cancellation. So if you're dealing with, if you have tenants and they potentially want to, how do you cancel their applications? Again, we kind of talked about just having a non-returnable application fees for those people that want to cancel. Or what if they're moving in and they put a deposit down? And one of the things I want to make sure that you understand, just check your state, but if people are moving in and you want to have a deposit to hold the property, please do not call it a security deposit. Call it something else. Check with your state, but I know there's several states where if you call it a security deposit and somebody, like say they're going to move into the property, and then you take it off the market, you have a lease already signed, they put down $1,000 for a deposit to hold the property until they do it, and then they go, oh, well, we found a better house for it. How do you handle that? Do they get their deposit back? Do they not get their deposit back? That's going to be something that you have to consider, because you are taking the property off the market. You may even have it off the market for weeks waiting for them to move in. So when they cancel, you need to make sure that you can handle that, and you have sort of your cancellation policies and things like that defined. One of the other things is renter's insurance. Part of your qualifications. Do you require renter's insurance? Now, most people do. Most people nowadays, renter's insurance is pretty standard when you have a lease or when you move someplace, but you need to make sure that you put that in there. Those are your qualifications. Now, there may not be a qualification regarding getting into the place, but in a sense it is, because they need to have renter's insurance before they move in, and they need to maintain it. So that becomes a part of your qualifications, even though the only thing you're really doing is just making sure that they have a renter's insurance policy that covers the property and any of their contents. Now, it can cover their contents, but really, for the most part, as a landlord, you just want to make sure that they have the liability portion, so that if they damage the property in any way, that their policy will cover the building. And you don't have to create a policy, or you don't have to create a claim on your homeowner's insurance to cover something that the renter did. Because if you have to do that, then your insurance cost goes up. Okay? So this is where renter's insurance can protect you from that, because the renter's insurance is the claim goes on the renter's insurance, not on your homeowner's insurance. So next thing is about security deposits. What type of security deposit? So if people we have, when we process applications, we have maybe people that are on the high end, like very low risk, good credit scores, they've been at their job, pretty much applying or approving these people are a no-brainer when you get them. And you'll see what they mean. 750 credit score, they make 5 times the monthly rent. They've got great rental history. I mean, everything about them screams, put them in your unit. Okay. So you've got those people all the way down to sort of moderate, but then you're going to have the people on the lower end of this, depending upon your risk factor. So if on the lower end, maybe they're a little bit more risky. So maybe they make enough money, but maybe they haven't been at their job a long time, or they've been at their job a long time, they make some money, but they might have had a problem with their last landlord. But you think they're going to be a good fit here. Can you what can you charge them for a security deposit? So this is something that you need to check with your state to find out how much you can possibly charge them for security deposits. So that's one of those things you need to have a qualification about, as far as if they, for instance, and I'm just giving you some examples here. If your credit score is below a certain amount, that makes you more risky. So you will need to put down an extra deposit or more deposit. But if your credit score is above this amount, then you don't need to do that. That would just be like one clear example of, you run a report. If their credit score is on the other side of that line, they need to put down an extra deposit. If they're not okay with that, then you need to pass on them and move on to the next people. So those are things that you need to come up with. What you can charge, what is your standard? I would have to highly recommend always make your security deposit higher than your rent. So just please make sure that you don't make them the same. Believe it or not, if you make them the same, mentally your applicant or the person living there will just kind of assume that that security deposit will be their last month's rent. And you'll have problems with them, especially when they're moving out. They may not pay you for the last month's rent, just like, oh, just keep the security deposit. Just keep that for the rent. I'm like, no, the security deposit is not to be used for the last month's rent. That's something that should be clearly stated in the lease. That security deposit is there to handle any damages, specifically with the unit, after you move out. So if nothing's damaged and everything is good, then I'll send you your security deposit back. Absolutely. So those things need to be decided upon. So applicants, when we talk about applicants, meaning the number of applicants, it kind of goes back to like roommates, what's allowed. Depending upon where you're at across the country, there could be what they call occupancy rules that apply. I know in the state of Missouri, we have occupancy rules, not in every state, but there's a limit on, for instance, the number of people that can live in a home or an apartment. There's a certain fixed limit. So obviously, if you have a home that's, let's just say a 2-bedroom home, that is enough that say has been certified for 4 people, and you have 8 people that want to move in there, a husband, wife, and 6 kids, that may be a bit much. So they may not be a good fit for your property, depending upon the number of applicants that they have. Occupancy, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but if you do live in across the country, certain states, specifically in the Midwest, I understand have occupancy rules. So this just means that inspectors for the local cities have to come out and check your property first to make sure it's up to code before you're allowed to move a renter in. So those are things that if you're buying properties remotely or buying properties in the Midwest, just please make sure you check on that, because that could affect a little bit of cash flow, how much time it would take to fill the unit, and it does require inspection. So if you do fail, you do have to get the unit fixed to meet those requirements before you're allowed to move a renter in. Okay. Another one is going to be things like smoking. Another qualification: smoking, non-smoking. Again, it's really hard if you're in, again, states that legalize marijuana, for instance. People like, well, it's legal, great, but that doesn't mean that you can smoke it in the apartment. Okay. I don't know if there's a designated smoking area that you want to come up with, but people smoke inside of your units. It will damage your units. You will have damage from walls. The smoke will get into cabinets, countertops, floorings, carpet, everything, and make it incredibly hard for you to clean it. And, and make sure that you can get that fixed for the next tenant that moves in there. Can be very costly. So these are just things that I wanted to bring up here. These are some of the major ones. There's some other ones that you can go over and look at in the tenant screening handbook here. But one of the things I want to give you, just a little golden nugget that I try to tell people is, in my opinion, it is better for you to leave your unit vacant than to put a bad tenant in it. So the whole point of these qualifications is to make sure that you're going to get a good tenant. So if you have the income right, the credit history, the criminal history, the rental history, they don't meet any of your automatic denials, they work place long enough for you, they have acceptable roommates or no roommates at all, pets or no pets, that they will buy renter's insurance, they'll pay the security deposit. If they meet all those qualifications, then for the most part, they've overcome enough hurdles that this person's going to be worth looking as an applicant for one of your places. So this is what I mean. If you're building your qualifications, build all this list up, and just once you have this, now you apply this to everyone. Once you apply it to everyone, now you're not discriminating, because all of these are based upon the characteristics of the applicant, not about any physical characteristics or anything that they do, just strictly based upon some very strict categories. So right now, again, keep in mind that it's better to keep your unit vacant than sit back and fill it to try, because a lot of people get nervous when it's vacant for a month or something like that, especially we just come in the wintertime. If you have winters where you're at, that it could be hard to rent during that time. So it could be vacant for a few months. And if you're paying a mortgage on that, that can hurt. You could be really looking to fill that unit to stop the bleeding, but by doing so and allowing somebody to have access to your property, if they stop paying, now you're going to have to sit back and go through other means to get them out, maybe even legal means, evictions. It could, depending on your state, it could take you weeks to months to get that particular person out, in which case you're not collecting any rent, they're living there for free, and you're still having to pay the mortgage because they're not paying the rent. So these are all good things that I just want you to think about and come up with your qualifications. Again, please utilize some of the free resources we have at veteranlandlord.com. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And stay tuned for the next episode. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Tenant Screening Podcast. To get your free copy of the Tenant Screening Handbook, visit us at veteranlandlord.com and create your free account. If you find this material valuable, we'd appreciate it if you can share this podcast with others and leave us a great review.